The SS Choctaw. Much like the traditional whalebacks seen on the Great Lakes that were designed by Captain Alexander McDougall, this vessel actually was designed by Swedish naval architect Arndt Engström. She shared similar designs from traditional whalebacks, however she would have straight sides and a conventional bow. She was also in a category of her own, known as semi-whalebacks, and there were only ever 3 semi-whalebacks ever constructed. The Andaste would be the identical sister ship of the Choctaw, and the Yuma. The Choctaw would be launched on May 25th of 1892. She was built by the Cleveland Shipbuilding Company, and she would also receive her name from a southern United States Indian tribe, which was named the Choctaw. These vessels were vulnerable to getting swamped in storms that would accumulate over the Great Lakes, and the Choctaw was no exception. The Choctaw had a length of 266 feet. She had a beam of 38 and a depth of 17. She also had a gross tonnage of 1,573 tons, and she had a net tonnage of 1,256. The Choctaw would come equipped with a triple expansion steam engine and 2 Scotch Marine boilers. She could also carry a crew of up to 22 aboard her. The Choctaw came designed with a cutaway stern and 7 cargo hatches. When she was fully loaded, she could carry 2,800 short tons aboard her of cargo. The Choctaw would spend her time carrying iron ore and coal. Her regular routes were between Detroit, Escanaba, Marquette, and Cleveland, Ohio. She was a regular workhorse. She would also make her maiden voyage to Marquette in June of 1892. On April 19th of 1893, the Choctaw would be traveling on Lake St. Clair, when, all of a sudden, one of her cylinder heads would explode. This explosion within her would scald 2 firemen to death, tragically, along with severely injuring another crew member. On May 20th of 1896, the Choctaw would be involved in a collision with the larger steel freighter L.C. Waldo. This collision would tear a 10-foot hole in the Choctaw's starboard side. She would then sink into the shoal at the Sioux Locks. On June 1st of 1896, temporary repairs would then be made on the Choctaw. Then she would sail to Cleveland, Ohio, where she would receive her final repairs. On April 26th of 1902, the Choctaw was being lifted up by waves near Marquette. This would cause her to either strike a rock or hit the bottom. She did partially sink after reaching the safety of Marquette Harbor. She would then be repaired and again set sail. One final event that the Choctaw would be involved in before her final voyage would be on November 9th of 1913, during the White Hurricane that would devastate the Great Lakes. The Choctaw's captain at the time, a Captain Charles A. Fox, would be the last person to see the 545-foot-long steel freighter Henry B. Smith leave the shelter of her harbor. This would be the last time that the Henry B. Smith was seen afloat, and she would also be one of the 12 vessels that would tragically be lost on the Great Lakes during the White Hurricane. In total, the SS Choctaw would serve for 23 years from 1892 to 1915 on the Great Lakes. Very impressive. However, like many of our stories, her end would come on July 11th of 1915. On July 11th, 1915, the Choctaw was upbound from Cleveland, and she was making her way for Marquette with a cargo of coal aboard her. She would be under the command of Captain Fox, and the conditions out on Lake Huron at that time were extremely foggy, or at the very least, not favorable. At 4:30 a.m., the Canadian canaler Wakanda was making her way downbound with a cargo of wheat from Fort William, Ontario to Montreal. The captain of the Wakanda, out of the fog, would see the Choctaw appear. Immediately he would order the engines of his ship to be in full reverse. However, this did not stop the momentum of the Wakanda, and she would collide into the Choctaw, slicing into the port side of the Choctaw between her first and second cargo hatches. After the chaos of the collision, the captain of the Wakanda would then lose sight of the Choctaw in the fog. The rest of the crew of the Wakanda would then relocate the Choctaw again after her tall funnel was seen through the heavy fog. Scrambling to make sense of the moment, Captain Fox would then order the Choctaw's lifeboats to be lowered into the lake. However, after the damage from the collision, the Choctaw would sink so quickly that some of her crew could not make it to the lifeboats, and instead had to jump overboard into the waters. Frantically swimming, the crew of the Choctaw that had jumped overboard, and the ones that did actually make it into lifeboats, made their way to the Wakanda. The Choctaw would end up sinking in around 17 minutes, and despite her entire crew of 22 escaping, not a single crew member would be lost, thankfully. The Wakanda as well did not sink, and she had some bow damage, which was significant. However, she was able to remain afloat, and she took the whole crew of the Choctaw, and they made their way to Sarnia, Ontario. I will now read an account from Captain Fox that recounts what happened in those early morning hours in the fog during the collision. And I quote, "We did not see the Wakanda until she was within 10 feet of us. She caught us on the port side and struck beams, or else she would have cut us in two. We put off in the lifeboats as quickly as possible. After we knew the ship could not float, the Choctaw listed to port and began to go down at the head. Then she righted and began to list to the starboard. As she shifted to the starboard, her stern rose out of the water, and she rolled over. Going down, bottom side up, we were in the yawl boats about 400 feet away when she rolled. It sounded as if a million dishes and hundreds of sticks were being broken as the ship rolled over." End quote. Just only a day after the collision and sinking of the Choctaw, a Captain Nelson Brown of the steamer James H. Reed would go on to spot the Choctaw's upper cabins floating off of Presque Isle, Michigan. He was actually able to read the ship's name as he approached the wreckage. Some 9 days after the collision and sinking of the Choctaw, around 40 feet of her cabin and several timbers from the vessel were also discovered about 1 mile north of Middle Island. This was by a Coast Guard and lighthouse keeper. A judge presiding over the investigation in case of the Choctaw and Wakanda collision would make the decision that both vessels were at fault. On May 23, 2017, researchers from the Thunder Bay National Marine Sanctuary would go on to discover the wreck of the Choctaw. She was found in a 448 square mile radius known as Shipwreck Alley. This Shipwreck Alley contains an estimated 200 shipwrecks within her. The Choctaw rests in 300 feet of water at the bottom Lake Huron. The Metamora tugboat. This vessel would be constructed at the Peck and Masters shipyard in Cleveland, Ohio. This was in 1864. The Metamora was actually at first designed to be a armor-plated gunboat. She would be tasked with patrolling the waters of what was at the time Upper Canada for the Fenian raiders. However, after the Fenian threat was gone in the 1870s, the armor plating and guns were removed. She would be stripped down to just a standard wooden tug, and she would spend her time ferrying passengers and goods in the Georgian Bay area of Ontario. The Metamora had a tonnage of 300 tons. She had a length of 121 feet, a beam of 21 feet, and for installed power, she had a steam engine. She could also carry a crew of up to 10 or 12 at a time aboard her. This tug would end up having an impressive 43 years of service on the Great Lakes, starting from 1864 to 1907. On September 29th of 1907, the Metamora was out towing a boom. This boom was actually a log boom, which was a large barrier or a floating pen of logs that she was taking behind her. The Metamora was making her way for the mill town of Bing Inlet, when all of a sudden she would strike a shallow shoal just west of Turning Island, which was near Point Albaril. After striking the shoal, she would actually somehow catch fire and then sink in the shallow water. But thankfully, all of her crew and passengers would end up surviving by swimming to the relatively short distance of the shore nearby. The Metamora at that time was owned by the Midland Towing and Wrecking Company. Years later, after the sinking, a portion from the Metamora's upper deck was actually still visible above the water. This did not burn in the initial fire. However, it is gone now. The only remaining portion of the Metamora that is still visible today is her boiler. This can still be seen above the surface. The Metamora's wreck is known as the wreck locally. The boiler has been since painted white, and a channel marker has been attached to it as a hazard warning for any other ships or boats that are passing in the area. The Metamora also only rests in about 6 feet of water, and she is a favorite spot for scuba divers. The last vessel on our list for today's episode deserves an honorable mention. That vessel would be the Thomas W. Palmer, a composite wooden Great Lakes bulk freighter that was built at Wyandotte, Michigan by the Detroit Dry Dock Company. The Palmer would be launched on February 9th of 1889. She would have a length of 296 feet, a beam of 41, and a depth of 23. This wooden freighter would have 2 decks aboard her, along with a triple expansion steam engine pushing her along. Now, the history into her sinking would take place on May 16th of 1905, where the Palmer would be involved in a collision with another steamer named the Harvard. This accident would happen about 32 miles east of Manitou Island in Lake Superior. Thankfully and fortunately, no lives would be lost in this collision. It is said that the Harvard would end up ramming into the Palmer because of foggy conditions that were out on Lake Superior that day. After the collision of the Palmer and the Harvard, all of the crew members aboard the Palmer would make their way safely over to the Harvard, where they would be rescued. And with that being said, that is 3 more stories of shipwrecks that were very close calls, but thankfully, no lives were lost. Well, I thank you everybody so very much in joining me in today's episode. I first want to say, before I get to my afterthoughts on these wrecks and their stories, is thank you again for your patience and sticking with me, as it has been a bit before, it has been a while since my last upload of a ship video. I've been spending the time just relaxing and taking a bit of vacation with the family, but I haven't been completely not doing anything. I did spend some really good time at the lakes getting footage at Michigan and Superior. As you can see from today's episode, I need to re-up and get some more good juicy footage to show you guys for these story videos. But I'll also use them for other projects in the future as well too. But yeah, thank you everybody. It was a good break. I needed to just de-stress and enjoy the water and enjoy family time and just get ready for summer, which is fast approaching here. But now on to my afterthoughts on these 3 stories, starting with the Choctaw being the biggest story, at least in this episode. I cannot believe nobody died on that accident. That is just incredible. When she was rammed by the Wakanda, and with how heavy the fog was, I mean, it makes sense, but from what I was understanding, I guess both vessels were going at full speed. They must have made proper whistle signals, but not enough. I mean, we've heard time and again how many of these vessels come out of the fog out of nowhere and just collide with each other. But the Choctaw sinking so fast like that, and then her crew, I don't know how they weren't dragged under with the suction when she went under, but I guess 17 minutes, that makes sense, I guess, for them to get away from it. But just incredible. Nobody lost their lives, thankfully. Thank goodness nobody lost their lives. That was an exciting story to read through, and very cool that they did find her wreck as well later in 2017, if I remember the date correctly. But yeah, the other 2 were definitely fun to talk about as well. The Metamora, and that was shallow enough when that accident happened. I wonder what triggered the fire within her. It must have been something knocked loose within her, or when she struck the shoal, that had to have caused something for the fire to happen within her, and she must have gone up pretty quickly. But yeah, thankfully everybody was able to swim safely to shore. And then lastly, the Thomas Palmer, there wasn't much I could find on her, at least online and through readings and stuff. But I definitely wanted to give her that honorable mention. Not every ship is going to have a long, extensive history and plot for plot moment detail of the wreck event happening, but it was an event that happened, and nobody died on it, so that's a positive, that's a win. But yeah, with that being said, let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below, as always, with your thoughts and any spelling errors or pronunciation corrections, as I do try my best with those. I thank you guys incredibly for your support, and with how this channel has just grown incredibly with the amount of viewers and subscribers. I welcome and thank everybody that is new here with me on this. But yeah, thank you, and there's always good content coming from this channel, so it's my goal to bring you the best. But anyway, I'm just rambling. I thank you everybody so very much in joining me again on today's episode. And as always, God bless you, and I will see you again next time on Songs of the Great Lakes.